Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to Good Thinking Live. Welcome all of you good thinkers from all over joining for the conversation that we have most Mondays, 9 a.m. Pacific time here in the US, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, where we steal about 30 minutes away from all the time we spend on what to think so we can give ourselves the time to think about our thinking to improve how we think. How many of you give yourself time to think about your thinking? I mean, aside from this, you set aside some period of time, once a month, once a week, some period of time to think about your thinking. How do you arrive at the things you believe to be true, et cetera, et cetera? And the role of intuition. We have got good thinkers coming on live from both YouTube streaming live and from LinkedIn Live. So Abdurrachid, welcome. Of course, someone here is a good thinker, regular good thinker who definitely gives yourself time to think about your thinking. And I have a question for you. What does that do to the quality of your thinking? Have you been doing it for a long time? Is that something that you've done for a long time? Or is it something that you've just started doing? And what do you see as the changes to I think it's fun, but and sometimes it's torturous. What do you see as the changes, benefits, or even disadvantages? So definitely let us know who you are and where you're from. And we're going to get started. I think this is going to be kind of a fun show because we're going to do a lot of exercises to see if, to challenge and to poke at our intuition. So here is the first question. For those of you who are here early, I'm going to say hi to a couple more people. Michael, good morning from Toronto. Thinking about thinking all the time. I know it's exhausting. Yay. And Ray, I am back after missing a couple of sessions. That's okay because we weren't here last week because sometimes the Good Thinking Show interacts or conflicts with rather doing a workshop or a presentation. So I have to do that first. So a couple of times Monday, I try to keep it away, but Monday creeps in. Vanya, welcome. Let's see. From Toronto, we've got another good thinker from Toronto. And Abdurrachid says, since I recognize your courses really helpful, honestly, they opened up a new world. Fabulous. I think that it's so fun to give ourselves time to think about our thinking. We've got Steve we've got Arvin, who I can't say, who did I get? Let's see, I've got Steve from Cleveland and Arvin from India and Stephen from the ancestral home of the Multnomah tribe, Pacific Northwest, native, fantastic. And Barkley from Washington, D.C. So I think we've got enough people coming on and continue to let us know who you are and where you're from. We're going to start. How many of you have seen this Molar, Lear, experiment? So I'm going to show you something on the screen, 3 lines, and you tell me A, B, or C, which line you think is longest. But here's the trick. And in all of this, because we're going to do a lot of these today, here's the trick. Your brain is going to tell you something immediate. Now, you might know this trick, so you have to override what your brain thinks, but I want you to answer 2 ways. One, and sometimes what your brain tells you is going to be right on some of these, and sometimes it's going to be wrong. So the first answer is going to be what you think your brain just tells you right away, which we would call your intuition, right? And the second is when you slow down the process, go from thinking fast and slow or think type systems 1 and systems 2 in the Daniel Kahneman parlance, when you go from that kind of immediate intuitive answer to a thoughtful answer. And if it's the same answer, it's fine. It could be like whatever. So I'm going to hold this up. I'm going to say hi to a couple people. Then I'm going to hold this up and you're going to say which, I'll tell you what you're going to assess in just a minute. All right. Let me say hi to Zaid. Welcome from Jordan and the UAE. Yay. And Eric, welcome from Topeka, Kansas. And welcome from Mumbai and from Pakistan. So this is cool because we've got so many good thinkers from all over the world. And that's what I love so much about the show. I love all you good thinkers. All right, so let's get started. Which of these lines does your brain tell you at first, which is the longest? And then if it's the same when you slow things down, maybe it could be the same answer. Are you ready? This is the Molar-Lear test. Some of you may have seen this. Let me make sure I hold this up so you can see. Which of these lines does your brain tell you right away let me make sure I get this in the camera, is the longest. The first thing your brain says, which is longest, and when you slow things down, does it say the same thing? This is a very famous test of intuition or fast and slow thinking. So I'm going to put this up here, hold it up, and you tell me which is the first thing your brain says is the longest, and then if you slow it down, does it change? Do you counter your intuition? What happens when you counter your intuition? All right. Okay. So the first thing Eric says the first thing he says is B. The first thing Vanya says is A. First answer, B. 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 Okay. So Ray says first B and later C. All right. First B and later C. All right. B, B, B. All right. So we're getting good answers. I'm going to go first answer. First answer. Ha ha. And then Michael says, and Ray says, and now we will show what happens, because there is no question that even though Ray's answer, you'll see in a second, is correct, Michael's answer correct, we can stop ourselves maybe and think, are those all different lengths? Our brains do what our brains do. Okay. And I'm going to give you some cool, this is going to be fun because we're going to do some other things. Okay. So we're going to say, this is going to prove the right answer. Ready? Am I getting this right? So now, what does your brain see? With this simple dotted line on either side, continuing A, B, and C, now what is your brain telling you? What is your brain telling you now? Your brain is telling you that they are all equal. And that's an example of where our intuition kind of just overrides even our sense of what may be right or wrong. So I'm going to take this banner off to have more room for our comments. All right. So they have the same. So Abdurrahman says, yeah, they're all the same length. Exactly. And Mania says the same, because that simple break helps, it kind of changes our intuition. And you wouldn't think that a dotted line like that would do something, but this is the power of counterintuition. This is the power of counterintuition. And that is why this topic today is so fun and important, because we don't necessarily control the first thing that pops into our brains. How many of you think that your intuition is average, stronger than average, or weaker than average? How many of you think that your intuition is average, stronger than average, or weaker than average? Let us know. And how many of you want to take a stab at what you think about when you think about your intuition? There's so many things. Trust your intuition. Trust your intuition. All of these things. Now, yeah, Abdurrahman says, I feel that my thinking has been tricked. And this is the power of counterintuition. And we're going to do some of these tricks today. I love this. I love this Molar Lear little effect, because it's a great way to say, it's one thing if I say, you got to think counter to your intuition. And you're like, yeah, no, that's what they need. I have a great intuition. My intuition is better than average, stronger than average, stronger than average. I have not met very many people who have said anything other than this. I think my intuition is stronger than average. Barkley says, my gut tells me it's average, but better for some things and worse for others. Fair enough. I don't think that my intuition is stronger than average, but I probably used to before I gave myself time to think about my thinking. So I'm going to make a case for countering intuition. When we're faced with certain situations, our minds just go naturally down a path, when the right way to think about things is sometimes a different path. And if you don't give yourself time to think about your thinking and value just this simple exercise of highlighting your counterintuition, you never get there. We just think, I can rely on my intuition, but there are things you can do to improve your thinking, which ultimately the best result of improving your thinking is improving your decision making. All right. So let's see. Michael says stronger than average has to do with confidence. Absolutely. Okay. So how much does confidence relate to competence? All right. It's actually domain based. Some areas are strong. Oh, okay. That's good. I'm going to give it some rubber chickens for this one because this one highlights where intuition is reliable and where it isn't. If I stop thinking, then my intuition gets it right. All right. So you think you stop thinking or you slow down your thinking? My question, Vanya, is are you stopping thinking or are you slowing down your thinking to give yourself time to think or think deeper? That's my question. All right. Let's do it. Let's do it. Here's an old one. This is it's not that old. It's a few years old. So some of you may have heard this, but regardless of how many times I've heard this, and frankly, how many times I've taught this in workshops, I still have to counter my initial intuition. Are you ready? Drum roll, drum roll. All right, this is the famous Daniel Kahneman bat and ball intuition. All right, you ready? A bat and a ball together, cumulatively, costs $1.10. All right? And we know that the bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Bat and ball cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Now, what's the first answer that pops into your head? So you can do your first answer, and then if your first answer is the same, you could say same. Or you could do your first answer that pops into your head, and if you have a different answer, you could put the different answer. So everyone roll in with this bat and ball. And it's totally fine if you've heard it before, because no matter how many times I've heard this, I still have a first answer that pops into my head. So I want to see if you guys do what my brain does or what most people's brains do, regardless of whether they are the highest level score, the highest on these intelligence tests, or kind of holding up the middle, the bell curve, just like the regulars like us, like me, I should say. Some of you might get it right away, but my intuition has always tells me that the answer to this question is 10 cents. Every time. I'm not seeing any answers. 10 cents. First, $1.10. Okay, so $1.10 is what they cost together, the total amount. You go to the grocery store, you buy the bat and the ball. They charge you $1.10, you walk out with both. But you know that the bat costs $1 more. Okay, so Steve says, first answer is 10 cents. The ball costs 10 cents. The ball costs 10 cents. The bat is $1. So that would mean that the ball is 10 cents. Okay, so everyone's intuition is that the ball costs 10 cents and the bat costs $1, right? Right? Then it's $1.10. But here's the question. If you counter your intuition, which is kind of a common way of saying check your work, is a bat that costs $1 more than a ball that costs 10 cents? Or is it 90 cents more? If you subtract $1, you take $1 and you subtract 10 cents, and you know that the bat has to be $1 more, you're going to get 90 cents. The second answer is $1.05 for the bat and 5 cents for the ball. Ding, 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 ding. Rubber chickens. Ding, 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 ding. But when we default to the first thing that comes to mind, our intuition, and then we think, our intuition's better than average, which is all fine. Could be true. But we don't take the time to counter our intuition by checking our work. And this is not just for riddles. It's for all kinds of things. It's for medical decisions, all kinds of decisions. Then we don't give ourselves that extra little time to think about our thinking by using counterintuition, something that's counterintuitive, then we don't arrive at the right answer. And there are times when there are right answers. All right. So how do you know whether to trust your intuition? The better answer might be, when do you know that you can trust your intuition? Or under what circumstances should you trust your intuition? All right, I'm going to give you another one. I love these riddles. Ready for another one? How many of you want another riddle before I tell you what conditions are appropriate for trusting your intuition and what aren't? And how many of you have taken, I can't remember, some of you have taken our LinkedIn learning courses on critical thinking and decision making and judgment. We've got another one coming out later this year that we're really excited about using kind of using the best of probabilistic thinking to judge the future, to make better decisions. So that's coming out. Look for that. All right. So I'm going to give you another one because Vinya says, yes, she wants another one. All right, here's another one. And I have to tell you, this is a tricky one because I think you have to think, what is, I'm smart. What is my first intuition? Now I'm going to give you the clue. What do? You counter your intuition by checking your work. All right, Abdurrachid says, ref. Now, Abdurrachid knows the secret to when you can trust your intuition. So bonus point there. And it's, this intuition ref is amazing, but we're going to hold off telling you this until you have this next one. Ready? Here are three people. There's three people all sitting in a bar. Okay. Sitting on a park bench, wherever you want to imagine them. There's Jack, there's Anne, and there's George. Jack, Anne, and George. All right. Jack is married, and Jack is looking at Anne. So Jack's married, and Jack's looking at Anne. All right. Anne is looking at George, and George is not married. So Jack's married, looking at Anne, and Anne's looking at George, who's not married. Here's the question. Is a married person looking at an unmarried person? In this three-person scenario, is a married person looking at an unmarried person? And you can answer yes, no, or cannot be determined by this amount of information. So yes, no, or cannot be determined with this information. So your first intuition is what? Maybe first intuition is this, and then think for a minute. Maybe you even do a little checking of your work. Maybe you come up with the same answer. Can you determine? So Vanya says no. Vanya says no. There is not a married person looking at an unmarried person. Steve says cannot be determined. All right. Barkley says yes. Ooh, we've got a yes. Cannot be determined, Vanya says. All right. 3D. So I think maybe that means cannot be determined. Cannot be determined. Let's see what we've got. Answers. We've got first is Jack. Next cannot be determined. We have no. Okay. So it looks like we've only got one yes. How many of you think Barkley's crazy with this yes? All right. Now let's check our work. I have to tell you, there's no question when I first encountered this little test, I was like, I didn't say no, but I said I can't be determined. All right? Can't be determined. But let's do a little counterintuition. And this is where we slow down our thinking. We go with our first thing. We go with our gut. We go with what the brain, we go with saying, which one's longer. Oopsie, this is upside down. We go with this, and then we slow down and we check our work. Okay, that's what we're going to do here. So we know that Jack is married. Okay, we know that George is not married. So we don't really know if Anne is married or not. So how can we know? You could say, well, we can't determine that. But Anne is either married or not married. In this case, there's not like all these other little things, bubble. There's just married or not married. So let's test it. If Anne is not married and Jack is looking at Anne, is there a married person looking at an unmarried person? Yes. If Anne is unmarried and Jack, who is married, is looking at Anne, then yes. Now let's see if Anne isn't. Let's see if Anne is married. If Anne is married, Jack is married, and Jack is looking at Anne, they're both married, then there's not a married person looking at an unmarried person. So you would think, But now Anne is married in the scenario, and she's looking at George, who is unmarried, right? Therefore, the answer is yes. Whether Anne is married or not married, there is a married person looking at an unmarried person. But our tendency to default to our intuition can lead us astray. What do we do about it? Two major things. Number one, we understand the situations and conditions required for intuition to be reliable. And there are not many. So the second one is to go ahead and value our intuition, but be sure to slow down and also value our counterintuition by checking our work, checking our conclusions, challenging our conclusions with a little bit of thoughtful deliberation, which is why we're here in the first place this morning. And I'm going to tell you, this has profound effects on our lives, including health decisions and decisions that could determine whether we live or die. Okay? I'll give you another example just to kind of drive home how powerful our intuition is and how effective it is just to slow down and turn the dial on counterintuition to check our work. Doctors offered two different treatments to cancer patients. One treatment had a 50% success rate, and the other treatment had a 90% success rate. Now, for those of you in the critical thinking realm, we could pick apart what it means. What does success mean? And that would be a really good question. By the way, if you get that kind of information from a doctor, be sure you poke at what they mean by success. There's no question, because with critical thinking, you want to make sure you have clarity of concept. But we're going to set that aside for right now and just hear this out. Just hear this out, because this is a different little lesson, right? Now, when doctors offered the 90%, 50% treatment, what did most people choose? Well, obviously, most people chose the 90% success rate. Why would you take 50% over 90%, provided that the success rate is something you want and apply to you? But then the doctors offered a story to just the group, to us. So they had this control group, and they, who chose 50, who chose 90. The vast majority chose 90. And then the other group had a story where they heard about one anecdotal awful outcome from the treatment that had the 90% success rate. One story. That was all it took. One story. What do you think happened to the treatments that the patients chose? Didn't change the statistical likelihood of success, but this horrible outcome that was associated with the 90% effective, what did people do? What did people do? Anyone want to take a stab? Did anyone really fall for that? Did anyone fall for it? Anyone want to take a stab? Well, after hearing this scary story, fewer than 40% of the patients, chose the treatment with the higher success rate. What did the patients do? They chose to have the story undue influence. And Abdurrashid says availability bias. And I think that's great. I think there's another one we could add to that. And I love this because all of the biases. So Vanya says, no, I know, I would have thought that too. But it's overwhelming. The other kind of tricky bias, and not just the availability, what comes to mind, and that's definitely a strong one at play for sure, is the affect heuristic. So these feelings of like and not like about these is influenced by, and then the negativity bias. So this is so interesting because so many of these biases, and this is the thing about these biases, like you think, okay, that's this bias and that bias. And they all, haven't you found out haven't you seen that how they all kind of work together? It's weird, but you can catch yourself. If you can identify these, you can catch yourself. More important to catch yourself and challenge your own biases than to play whack-a-mole with others. All right, loss aversion, another one. But loss aversion probably I would argue that loss aversion wouldn't be at play as much with the story, because I think loss aversion is a little different, but although it probably is an element too. All right. So now today could be a conversation about the power of a good story. And we know, I mean, you can go on LinkedIn, storytelling and story selling and the power of a good story, and you got to have your story and whatever. And that's great. And the stories are extremely powerful, and they can help people learn really important lessons. Stories, there's nothing more powerful than a story. But for good thinkers, we don't want to feel trapped by a story. That's the challenge. We don't want to feel trapped by a story. So we know the power of story, and we're not going to discredit that, but we're going to stop our intuition from going in the direction that the story tells, the narrative bias, right? And we're going to try to use counterintuition. So I'm going to get to, in the last few minutes, what we can do to counter our intuition. Number one is ref. Recognize when intuition should be considered reliable and when it isn't. And I like this so much. It helps me all the time, which is our intuition referee. Ref stands for regularity, exposure, and feedback. Now, a lot of people who took the course said, regularity and exposure, it seems like two things, the same thing, not two separate things. And I probably could have described it a little bit better, but regularity is more of a controlled environment where things happen more linearly. You might have a lot of different options, but they're all controlled. And you might think of, like, one of the most common ones is chess master. You're not going to have to think about some kind of airplane coming and, bombing your chessboard. I mean, you're going to see all of the options are there. You might not see all the different moves, but a computer could spew out all the different, options. A couple of other things. So the regularity is things that tend to happen the same way in a system. Okay. It's hard. So you sometimes see firefighters when you hear them use their intuition, because you go into a burning building and the fire, given the situation, can react in very predictable ways if you knew all of the factors. Fire, needs certain kind of oxygen. It needs a bunch of things. So anyway, so that's regularity. Separate than exposure, because you could have a regular situation but you haven't been exposed to it enough. So you need enough exposure. So that's E for ref, enough exposure. You need to be in there time after time after time after time, experiencing that system. Investment, the stock market, not regular. No matter how much exposure you have, too much complexity to use your intuition. That's why you want to use tools. You don't want to use just your intuition. You want to counter your intuition when you have a feeling, I think this is going to happen. I think the cryptocurrency is going to do this or that. Okay. Now, regularity is not the frequency. I want to be clear. Abdurrahman, regularity is not the frequency. Exposure is the frequency. Regularity is the system. Regularity is the system. And I think I didn't make that probably as clear in the course as I could have. And then the final thing is feedback. You need to have feedback that's immediate. So if you do something and you get a year or two down the line, you get feedback, that's not immediate enough feedback for you to use your intuition. So you can start to see that to use your intuition, intuition's going to happen. You're going to have this feeling whether you want it or not. You're going to see these lines, right? We're going to see these lines as different lengths, whether we want our brains to or not. That's just going to happen. But should you trust it? Have you been exposed to this time and time again? Then you still, even if I've been exposed to this a million times, we use it in our work, but my brain still goes to saying, which is the longest one, B. I still see it. And then I have to slow down and use my counterintuition. So the key is to notice what your intuition is telling you, use ref to judge, and then hold off judging your intuition. Identify what you're tempted to think or tempted to do, and instead use your counterintuition. Turn your intuition on your head by showing your work. All right. That is really it. Also, beware of stories burying statistics. Don't let the story plus your intuition lead you further down that yellow brick road in the wrong direction. So turn your intuition upside down. That's it. That's today. And be sure to share, invite other good thinkers onto the show. We're here most Mondays on YouTube Live, streaming live, and on LinkedIn Live and comment afterwards, join the conversation because it's a conversation. And if I could see all your faces and we could actually have a real conversation, that would be even better. But I love your chats and I love your comments. So hope to see you next week. Have a great week.